The Texas heat was suffocating inside that small Methodist chapel, worse than the blazing sun outside. The oak casket lay before the altar, and I, Linda Miller, felt like a stranger in my own grief. 3 days earlier, I had buried the man with whom I'd shared 10 years of life, sleepless nights, ranch debts, and small victories. Now, between funeral wreaths and muffled whispers, my mother-in-law Mary's harsh voice cut through the air like a knife. Linda, you'll need to return the house keys today. That property has belonged to the family since before you came along. Several relatives exchanged satisfied glances, as if witnessing the end of a charade. My brother-in-law David, in his expensive suit and arrogant demeanor, smirked from the corner. Better not make this difficult, Linda. The will is very clear. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just closed my hand around the wedding ring on my finger and took a deep breath. They didn't know, or pretended not to know, that John and I had gone to the Dallas County Clerk's office 2 years before. And that day, John's grandfather, old Alberto, had insisted on registering a different deed, one that now burned in my memory as the only protection I had left. 2 days later, in an office with dark wood-paneled walls, the scene repeated itself. Me on one side of the table, the entire family on the other. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, adjusted his glasses and opened the folder. His voice was firm, but laden with formality. According to the will of John Miller, dated February 2023, the main ranch passes to his mother, Mary Miller. The vehicles and financial assets are divided equally between the siblings, David and Carol Miller. To Linda Miller, his wife, he leaves the symbolic amount of $1. Silence settled for a few seconds before being broken by David's muffled laugh. $1. Seems fair for the little she contributed. The words stung like daggers, but I didn't let them see my pain. I raised my eyes to the lawyer and with a calm voice asked, Mr. Henderson, what about the other document? David frowned. What other document? I gripped my purse handle tightly. It wasn't time to show everything yet, but I could already feel the turnaround approaching. Mary leaned over the table, her voice sharp as a blade. Don't make up stories, Linda. John would never trust you with anything. Everyone here knows you only entered his life out of interest. David added with contempt. My brother was always too generous. You were lucky he gave you a roof for a few years. I held back the urge to respond with shouts. I had learned that with people like them, silence often hurt more than any words. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the tension. Mrs. Miller, I must clarify that in addition to the will, there are notarized records of documents attached to the estate. I didn't bring them today because they weren't in the same envelope. The room trembled. The triumphant expressions on Mary and David's faces transformed into uneasiness. What records? Mary demanded. This will be officially presented at the next hearing, the lawyer responded. But I can advance that it involves the property title of the ranch. David slammed the table. That's impossible. My brother would never do something like that without telling us. I took a deep breath. They were about to discover they knew less about John and about me than they imagined. That night, at home, I sat on the bedroom floor with the brown envelope in my hands. Inside, the deed signed at the 3rd Dallas County Clerk's office, dated 2021. John and I had spent weeks fighting because of family pressure. He wanted to leave everything to them. But it was Grandpa Alberto, already frail, who made him see clearly. John, marriage isn't a favor. It's a partnership. This girl stayed by your side when no one else believed. Guarantee her the right to live in the house you built together. That day, we signed the lifetime usufruct deed in my name. I would have the right to live on the ranch until the end of my life, regardless of will or inheritance. I remembered John's tired look as he signed, and Grandpa Alberto's trembling hand resting on mine. Now that paper wasn't just a document. It was my last line of defense, and I was ready to use it. At the next hearing, the judge had barely begun when the lawyer presented the document. Your Honor, in addition to the will, there is this public deed registered in Dallas, guaranteeing Mrs. Linda Miller lifetime usufruct of the ranch located in Fort Worth. Mary gasped as if she'd been punched. David stood up from his chair, red with rage. This is fraud! It can't be real! The judge raised his hand asking for silence. Public document registered at the notary. Stamp, witnesses, and book registry. It's authentic. A murmur ran through the room. I maintained my firm posture, but inside I felt a wave of relief and also fear. The war had just begun. Mary leaned forward. Even with that paper, you have no right to the family business. We'll contest every line. Contest away, I thought. But the law is with me. The following weeks were of constant attacks. Anonymous phone calls, hostile looks at the market, neighbors repeating rumors that I had forged documents. But I wasn't alone. Grandpa Alberto's letter, kept with the deed, was clear. Linda, the house will be your shelter. The rest of the family can struggle as they wish, but I won't allow them to erase your story with John. At the final hearing, Mr. Henderson asked for the attached letter to be read. The silence was almost sacred. Mary lowered her eyes, unable to sustain her own narrative that I was just a stranger. David bit his nails, already realizing there was no way to reverse this. With each word read, I felt the chains of humiliation breaking. They had treated me as invisible for years. Now it was the law and the memory of who truly respected me that spoke for me. David, in desperation, tried one last move. She doesn't deserve anything. My brother supported her. She never worked. I stood up finally, letting go of my calm. I was there when John almost lost the ranch. I was the one who negotiated with the bank. I was the one who handled the accounts when he got sick. I was by his side when all of you abandoned him. And you want to talk about merit? You don't know what sacrifice is. The judge banged his gavel. Enough. The document is valid. Mrs. Miller's lifetime usufruct is guaranteed. The ranch cannot be taken from her under any legal hypothesis. David's face crumbled. Mary cried quietly. I remained standing, not in triumph, but in dignity. When we left the courthouse, reporters were waiting outside. Someone asked, Linda, what do you intend to do now that you've won the dispute? I looked at the cameras and responded, it's not about winning. It's about protecting what we built together. I don't want to destroy my husband's family. I just want respect. Some were surprised by my response, but I knew that more than land or money, the true victory was showing they couldn't erase me. That night I lay on the ranch porch. The wind carried the smell of hay and freedom. I had won, but in a way that allowed me to move forward in peace. Months passed. Mary never spoke to me again, but sent flowers on my birthday, a small but symbolic gesture. David remained distant, but the gossip ceased. The ranch prospered again. Now, under my firm leadership, I created a scholarship fund for young farmers in the region in John's name, something he always wanted but could never accomplish. And for the first time in years, I sat at the table without feeling like an unwanted guest. The ranch wasn't just my house, it was my place in the world. A year later, when opening the desk drawer, I found Grandpa Alberto's letter. The final words still gave me chills. Sometimes winning isn't taking everything. It's simply remaining standing when everyone expected you to fall. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't need to expel anyone. I didn't need revenge. All I did was defend my dignity with the truth that was written on paper. Today, when I look at the ranch at sunset, I don't just see lands or fences. I see the story of a woman who they said deserved nothing, but who proved she deserved everything. The courtroom battles had revealed more than just legal documents. They had exposed the true nature of family relationships that had been masked for years. Mary's hostility wasn't just about the property. It was about control, about maintaining the narrative that I was an outsider who had infiltrated their perfect family circle. But John had seen through that facade long before his death. In our private moments, he would apologize for their behavior, promising that one day things would be different. I never imagined that day would come after he was gone, through a piece of paper that spoke louder than any of their accusations. The ranch itself seemed to breathe easier now. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, the windmill turned steadily in the Texas breeze, and the old oak tree that John and I had planted on our first anniversary stood tall and strong. Every morning I would walk the property lines, not as someone checking boundaries, but as someone who had earned the right to call this place home. The workers who had once looked at me with uncertainty now tipped their hats with genuine respect. They had witnessed the transformation, not just of ownership, but of purpose. I started implementing changes that John had always dreamed about but never had the courage to pursue against his family's wishes. Solar panels now gleamed on the barn roof, cutting our energy costs in half. A new irrigation system transformed the dried patches into productive land. The old equipment shed became a community workshop where local farmers could repair their machinery at cost. These weren't acts of defiance against his family. They were acts of love for the vision John and I had shared during those late-night conversations when the world felt full of possibilities. The scholarship fund grew beyond my expectations. Local businesses contributed, seeing it as a way to invest in the future of Texas agriculture. The first recipient was a young woman named Maria, whose situation reminded me painfully of my own years ago. She had the knowledge, the passion, but not the resources. Watching her accept that scholarship, seeing the tears of joy in her parents' eyes, I understood that my fight hadn't been just about me. It had been about every person who had been told they didn't belong, that they weren't worthy, that their contributions didn't matter. David eventually reached out through an intermediary, a mutual friend from church. He wanted to discuss a business proposition, something about combining resources for a larger agricultural venture. I agreed to meet him, not out of forgiveness, but out of practicality. The meeting was tense at first, both of us carrying the weight of harsh words and bitter memories. But as we talked about soil conditions and market prices, something shifted. We found common ground in our shared knowledge of the land, even if we could never find common ground in our hearts. The partnership never materialized, but the conversation ended with a handshake that felt like a small victory for civility. Carol, John's sister, who had remained silent throughout the legal battle, surprised me one evening. She appeared at my door with a casserole and an apology. She told me she had always known about the deed, that John had confided in her months before his death. She had been too afraid to speak up, too worried about losing her place in the family hierarchy. We sat on the porch until midnight, sharing stories about John that made us both laugh and cry. She became my unexpected ally, the bridge between two worlds that had seemed irreconcilable. The seasonal workers began bringing their families for the annual harvest celebration, something that had stopped years ago when John's health declined. Children ran through the fields, their laughter echoing across the property like a blessing. Old-timers shared stories of the ranch's history, tales that went back generations, and for the first time, they included me in those narratives. I wasn't just John's widow anymore. I was Linda Miller, the woman who had saved the ranch from both financial ruin and family greed. During one particularly difficult drought, when other ranches were selling off livestock at losses, our new water management system kept us thriving. Neighbors came to learn our methods, and I shared freely, remembering how John had always believed that a rising tide lifts all boats. The local agricultural extension office invited me to speak at their conference, something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, I realized that my story had become larger than just a family dispute. It had become a testament to perseverance. The house itself underwent changes too. I finally painted the kitchen the soft yellow that John had promised we would do together someday. I converted his old study into a library, filling it with agricultural journals and books on sustainable farming. But I kept his chair exactly where it was, facing the window that looked out over the south pasture. Sometimes, in the early morning light, I would sit there with my coffee and feel his presence, not as a ghost, but as a gentle reminder of why I had fought so hard. Legal documents arrived periodically, attempts by Mary to find loopholes, to challenge technicalities. Each time, Mr. Henderson would review them and assure me that our position was unassailable. The lifetime usufruct was ironclad, witnessed not just by two strangers, but by the notary who remembered the day clearly. He had told the court that he had rarely seen such certainty in a person's eyes as he had seen in Grandpa Alberto's that day. The old man had known exactly what he was doing, protecting not just property, but a promise. The town's perception shifted gradually. Where once I had been the outsider who had somehow tricked their golden boy, I became the widow who had stood her ground with grace. The local pastor, who had been conspicuously absent during the funeral drama, now sought my input on community matters. The bank manager, who had once looked at me with skepticism, now consulted me about agricultural loans for young farmers. The transformation wasn't just in how they saw me, but in how I saw myself. I established a routine that honored both the past and the future. Mornings were for ranch work, afternoons for business management, and evenings for planning. I hired a young foreman, Tom, whose innovative ideas complemented my experience. Together, we increased productivity by 30% in the first year. The success wasn't just measured in dollars, but in the health of the land, the quality of life for our workers, and the sustainability of our practices. The first anniversary of John's death approached with a weight I hadn't anticipated. I considered leaving town, avoiding the memories, but realized that running wasn't who I had become. Instead, I organized a memorial ride, inviting anyone who wanted to remember John to join me on horseback across the property he had loved. To my surprise, dozens came, including some who had sided with his family during the dispute. We rode in silence mostly, but it was a peaceful silence, one that spoke of healing and acceptance. Mary appeared at the memorial ride, dressed in black, maintaining her distance but present nonetheless. We didn't speak, but when our eyes met across the field, there was something different in her gaze. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a grudging recognition that I had earned my place through more than just a legal document. She left before the gathering at the house, but her presence had been noted by everyone, a small crack in the wall she had built. The seasonal changes brought new challenges and opportunities. During calving season, I worked alongside the ranch hands, proving that my knowledge wasn't just theoretical. When a difficult birth required intervention at 3 a.m, I was there in the barn, hands dirty, making the decisions that could mean life or death for our livestock. These moments, more than any legal victory, earned me the genuine respect of those who worked the land. I started a mentorship program, pairing experienced ranchers with newcomers. The exchange of knowledge flowed both ways, with older generations learning about new technologies while younger farmers gained wisdom about reading the land and weather patterns. The program gained recognition from the state agricultural department, leading to funding that expanded our reach beyond the county. The family business that David had mentioned during the court battle, a small processing facility, eventually faced financial difficulties. When the opportunity arose to purchase it, I did so through a blind trust, not out of revenge, but as a sound business decision. It wasn't until months later that David learned who the new owner was. His reaction, surprisingly, was one of resigned respect rather than anger. Perhaps he had finally understood that competence, not birthright, should determine stewardship. 5 years passed, each one adding layers to my story. The ranch became known for its innovative practices, attracting agricultural students from the nearby university for internships. The house hosted meetings for the local farmers' cooperative, its large dining room table surrounded by people planning for the future of Texas agriculture. In these moments, I thought of John, how proud he would have been to see his land serving such a purpose. The scholarship fund had supported 20 students by then, each one going on to contribute to their communities in meaningful ways. Maria, the first recipient, had graduated with honors and returned to establish her own organic farming operation. She often stopped by to share her progress, and in her success, I saw the ripple effects of standing firm in the face of injustice. One autumn evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey. The legal document that had saved me was stored safely in a bank deposit box, but its power had transcended paper and ink. It had become a symbol of recognition, of worth that couldn't be measured in dollars or acres. Grandpa Alberto's wisdom had protected more than just my home. It had preserved my dignity and given me the foundation to build something greater than anyone had imagined. The ranch thrived not because I had won a legal battle, but because I had honored the trust placed in me. Every improvement, every innovation, every act of generosity toward the community was a testament to the partnership that John and I had shared. The family that had tried to erase me from their narrative had instead written me permanently into the history of this land. As darkness settled over the Texas plains, I stood and walked to the edge of the porch. The cattle were settling for the night, their low sounds carrying across the fields. The windmill creaked gently in the evening breeze, a familiar sound that had become the soundtrack of my new life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well and with purpose. The manila envelope that had changed everything sat in my desk drawer, rarely looked at now, but never forgotten. It represented not just a legal victory, but a transformation. From widow to owner, from outsider to leader, from humiliated to respected. The journey had been painful, filled with moments when giving up would have been easier. But I had learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with anger or revenge, but with quiet determination and unshakable truth. And I say to you who watches this, what would you do in my place? Would you remain silent or fight until the end? If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments. What would be your choice?